Everdark, Episode 95, My Enemies, My Own. Last on Everdark, Balthazar is visited by the mysterious House Winter, a powerful ancient house of the Eiros bloodline. His rage at being left out to dry by them comes out, but they manage to avert his ire and offer an important bit of information. Kali has more than one form, and they know who those forms are. If Kali has managed to split his soul, or simply to have prepared bodies elsewhere for him to inhabit Eiros, then attacking Lasting would have only one purpose. Daemon sent to Balthazar. And what would that be? Balthazar asked. Balthazar was still staring at the vampires from House Winter with a sort of horrified fascination. These were the ultimate insiders, and he hated the fact that he still had some desire to belong. Offering friendship and obeisance to Balthazar had eased some of this need, but Daemon knew this wound was deep. Demoralizing those that would follow Kali, Daemon answered. Or potentially making him into a martyr, Balthazar replied dryly. He's had ages since you've been asleep to put together a plan A, B, C, hell, maybe all the way through the alphabet and then starting again at AA. Daemon frowned. The Eiros vampire who was bowing before him turned white, thinking the look was at him. Daemon replaced the frown quickly with a smile.
Everything okay?
Julian asked. The soft puff of his fledgling's breath against his skin was warm and pleasant. Daemon reached up and caressed Julian's cheek. Julian turned his face into that touch, kissing his palm. Everything is perfect, Daemon assured him. And it was. Julian was his fledgling. Eiros, Seer, and Wyvern were back at his side. He caught a glimpse of Fiona. Her gaze swept over the Eiros vampires with suspicion. He did not think she felt suspicion against them because they were Eiros. She would have distrusted any vampire of any bloodline, including her own. Perhaps especially her own. Another one of his immortals that had been wounded during his sleep. This would not do. He must help repair this damage.
You sure?
Julian's eyebrows were crawling up into his hairline and his lips twitched with a smile. You just wish to get out of greeting our subjects, Daemon murmured. Julian gave a one-shouldered shrug.
Maybe I would just like to spend some time alone with you.
Daemon's eyes smoldered, and a rare blush crossed Julian's high cheekbones. But he said, duty first. Julian sighed, but he didn't object. He was actually happy, even though a thread of worry for his parents' souls was still quite prevalent in his thoughts. So while going to Lasting had some reason behind it, finding Kali was necessary. House Winter claimed to know where those bodies were. That was something to be dealt with now. He abruptly stood.
Daemon?
Julian's brow furrowed. He was a little afraid that he had caused Daemon to ignore his duty, but Daemon assured him that it was not so. He kissed Julian's forehead as he did so. No, House Winter has information for us vital to defeating Kali and getting your parents back. Immediately, Julian was on alert, practically foaming at the mouth to move. The line of Eiros vampires stirred uneasily. They were not sure about him. They were not sure about themselves and their place here. Balthazar had looked at each of them with a barely concealed distaste. They all knew that he had not been treated as he should have been when he had been under Roan Tide's care. Arceus and Fiona came to his side, even as Seer got up from her chair.
What is it, my king? Has something displeased you?
Arceus had one arm crossed over his chest and his head bowed. Daemon put a hand on that bowed head, feeling Arceus's joy and awe at that touch. We have much to do. There will be plenty of time to enjoy our victories ahead. Tell all Eiros to spread the word about what they saw and heard today. Let all know that their king has returned.
And what about the next step after that?
Fiona asked, her eyes searching his face.
Fiona?
Arceus sounded scandalized at her suspicion, but Daemon knew how hard it was for her to have trusted him this far. That is what we are going to discuss and decide, Daemon told her. Arceus, you and Fiona should join us in Balthazar's study when you're done here. Another sweeping bow from Arceus.
It shall be done.
As Arceus and Fiona turned to address the still large crowd, Damon led Julian and Christian over to where Seer was standing by the back door.
We're going in? Thank goodness.
Christian said, as he picked imagined pieces of lint off of his clothes.
I was worried if I left him alone too long with Mephi, he might replace me.
Damon snorted in amusement.
He really did pull one over on all of us.
Seer remarked as she put her arm through Damon's offered one.
Not even Sophia knew how.
I don't think they did.
Christian replied.
He probably had a cat as a child and adored it completely. I can totally see him feeding it scraps off of his plate.
You're probably right, my dear.
Seer beamed at Christian.
Where are the other three? I know that Sophia didn't want them affecting your sleep.
Julian asked as they stepped inside the manor.
Oh, they have found many willing arms and beds to sleep in.
Seer's arm tightened on Damon's.
She is so thoughtful. Unfortunately, my long time alone in the spire has affected me in some ways. Like Elgar, I am not quite myself fully yet. During sleep, the full weight of my situation would fall upon me, and my rest was fitful at best.
Damon patted her hand. He did not say anything. To say he was sorry was insufficient, and she would not accept his apology. To promise to destroy those who had harmed her would be pointless. She could do that herself. Caemorn, the latest in her captors after all, was already imprisoned himself. If Caemorn were not partially a victim himself of Calais, Damon would have killed him already.
I don't think that any of us can imagine how hard things have been for you.
Julian's expression was grim as he said this. His fledgling's thoughts went in two very dark places. The first was to a place of guilt. After all, Damon had gone to sleep to await him. Seer would not have been imprisoned but for that. And the second place was that of his parents. Were their circumstances much different than Seer's had been? What were their prisons like? Unlike Seer, they had no knowledge of the future, especially one where everything would turn out as it should. Seer reached over after a mental check with Damon to touch Julian's cheek in a fond way.
Don't let your thoughts linger on what happened to me. I would gladly sacrifice it all again to have this outcome.
Yet, could there not have been an outcome where I stayed awake instead of sleeping until my Julian came to me? Damon wondered out loud.
You know there was not a future like that. Not one that would not have wounded your mind, Damon. And your mind must remain intact for all our sakes.
Seer said the last softly. They were outside of the doorway to Balthazar's study, which cut off all conversation. Balthazar's cry of, "Come!" had Damon opening the door. Balthazar stood up from behind his desk, while the other Eiros vampires did the same. Rajani bowed low and offered her seat to him, but Damon shook his head and offered it to Seer instead. She was still weak physically, though her mind was sharp. Rajani looked at Seer with undisguised amazement.
Is it true that you are the immortal seer?
Indeed, I am, Rajani.
Seer answered as she settled herself in the chair.
So Eiros, Seer, and Damon in one room.
Rajani shook her head as if she could not believe it. And when Fiona gets here, we'll be adding a fourth immortal. Balthazar chuckled, outing Fiona easily. Not that these powerful Eiros vampires would not have figured it out. Rajani froze.
Ah!
You thought something was off about her? Balthazar chuckled as he seated himself. He rolled his eyes at Damon. If I bloody well have to deal with being Eiros to support you, then she doesn't get a pass.
She's not ready, Eros.
Seer clucked, but still smiled.
You two have more in common than you know. Perhaps that is why you do not get along.
We get along just fine. It's just we're both two dogs, and Arceus has been the bone that each of us has wanted for years. So we snarl and snap and growl at one another while Arceus allows himself to be gnawed at both ends. Balthazar spread his arms wide and grinned. Mephi mewed in his sleep, as if the very thought of dogs was distressing. Christian made his way around the desk to be by Balthazar's side. Despite showing a touch of jealousy about Mephi, he petted the kitten before he put a loving hand on Balthazar's shoulder, while Balthazar slung a possessive arm around his waist. Christian gave Elgar a welcoming smile, even as the older fledgling ducked his head with happiness. Eiros was happy, so he was happy.
You have come to learn the locations of Callie's bodies, yes?
Rajani asked Damon. He nodded and stroked Julian's back. His fledgling was as taut as a bowstring.
Unsurprisingly, these locations were gained from careful culling of many minds. We have,
Rajani paused again as her eyes flickered over the group.
forgive me, we do not tell our secrets lightly.
You don't have to worry about telling them, Balthazar growled. Damon and I could simply pluck them from your minds.
And what secrets, my dear, do you have from your immortal and your king?
Seer asked. Her tone was gentle, but Rajani shivered before she could stop herself.
Yes, of course, how foolish of me.
Rajani inclined her head.
In House Winter, we employ listeners.
If you're in the mood to listen to something really different, I recorded a 3-part short story in 2020 for Halloween. It's called Hero, and it's a gay vampire horror story. Definitely not romance. You can hear my first attempt at a dramatic narration. It's completely open to listen to on YouTube, and I'll post the link in the notes.
Christian frowned.
What are those?
I'm intrigued as well, Balthazar stated. Elgar's head lifted. Interesting.
What is Elgar?
Christian asked him kindly. They have linked the minds of many of the strongest of the house, and the most pliant too, in order to listen to all vampires' minds everywhere, Elgar explained. Balthazar let out a whistle. Sneaky, sneaky. I bet if the other bloodlines knew you were doing that, they wouldn't be happy.
Indeed, they would not.
Rajani agreed.
But we have done this not only to protect ourselves and others of the Iros bloodline, but all vampire kind.
Really?
Julian's brows were drawn together.
Though most of what the Order told us about the war and the reasons behind it, and evidently its outcome, was a lie, they did not lie about how devastating it was.
Rajani's caramel-colored skin grew darker for a moment with a flush of emotion. Her bow-shaped mouth flattened.
It's not just the simple loss of second lives, but there were many, like Roan and others of his ilk, that were both created for the purpose of war and were wounded by it in ways other than physical ones. So our listening is to nip conflicts in the bud when we can, before they grow into bigger confrontations.
It was Balthazar's turn to look grim. If you mean to suggest that Roan Tithe should be forgiven for his sadism because of some post-war trauma, you'll find no takers here. Rajani inclined her head once more.
No, that is understood. But he was turned because of that sadism. The last thing we want is for more people like him brought into our species. It does not strengthen us to have such beings.
But he was a warrior?
Christian studied her.
And his lack of scruples in regards to hurting others must have made him valuable in some ways. Otherwise, why wouldn't he have been given his second death when it was clear he was abusing his house?
Damon saw Balthazar's free hand tighten on the arm of his chair. Why indeed had they not been saved? Why had Iros been asked to do something that must have been quite desperate and that left such a mark?
If we allow vampires to kill one another without any consequences, that way would lead towards chaos.
Rajani answered.
Justice keeps us from chaos too, Rajani.
Arceus said as he and Fiona stepped into Balthazar's office and shut the door.
If Roan had been tried, found guilty, and stripped of his house or given his second death, that would have done far more to keep the vampire world at peace than allowing many vampires to suffer until Balthazar did what had to be done.
You have a point.
Rajani agreed.
It was not an easy decision, and clearly, we made the wrong one in not acting.
Arceus and Fiona found space by the fireplace. The whole room was stuffed with people. My goodness, I don't think this office has seen so many visitors, let alone at once, as it has tonight. Balthazar laughed.
That's because you rarely come in here.
Arceus chided him gently.
Only I come in here to look over accounts.
Balthazar shrugged. Accounts are no fun. Besides, since you'll do them for me, he winked at Arceus. The confessor shook his head, then said to Damon,
Fiona and I did as you commanded. The vampires are returning to their homes and will spread the word.
Too bad we don't have access to destiny any longer. Balthazar mused. speaking of the Everdark city that had been Iros's. I can't believe I named it that. Quite arrogant. Christian smiled down at him.
I think that sounds just like you.
Oh, yes, Balthazar agreed. It does. Just a bit on the nose, though.
How can you lose a whole city?
Julian stared at Balthazar. Well, now that I'm thinking of things, I wonder if it is really lost. Balthazar looked between Elgar and Damon. One of you must know where a gate is to access it.
We actually have a gate to destiny in House Winter.
Rajani said quickly, as she sensed Damon was about to mention it. Truly? Balthazar leaned forward. So then you've been keeping a whole city to yourself and secret? But she shook her head.
It is locked. Iros, you locked it.
Well, now that I'm back, maybe I can unlock it. Balthazar's eyes were shining with excitement. Or surely you can, Damon, if I don't prove up to the task. Damon smiled and nodded. I think you will be the one to open it, Balthazar. It is your home, after all. Balthazar stroked his chin thoughtfully. You know, other than seeing Solace a few times, I've maybe been in the Everdark overall for a total of a week. But to have an actual city all my own there, all the secrets, all the power, and weapons, and memories, and beauty. Destiny is situated between a great forest and the sea, Damon told him. Again this dreamy expression crossed Balthazar's face. The sea. Gods, that sounds glorious. The whole of the city is a palace, Damon told him. That's brilliant! Then Balthazar frowned. But people would get underfoot.
You love people,
Arceus reminded him.
You always want people around you. You said the quiet is too loud when you're alone.
True. Balthazar turned to Christian and Elgar. I do so love the manor, but a palace. You two would like a palace, wouldn't you? Rather like a summer home?
Ever since Julian and I saw Nightfallen, we've been dying to start adventuring there.
Christian told him.
Right, Julian? Absolutely.
Julian nodded swiftly. Damon felt his fledgling's mind fill with excitement. Julian's true nature was that of an explorer. Julian imagined filming parts of the Everdark that had never been seen. He wondered at the idea of truly finding the hidden byways of that place, maybe even finding how the cities were connected. Damon smiled. He, of course, knew the answers to all those questions, but he would love seeing Julian and Christian discover it for themselves. I would go with you, Christian, Elgar said simply. I would keep you both safe. The Everdark has many wonders, but even more dangers.
Absolutely. But we wouldn't want to go without you.
Christian smiled winsomely at Elgar. It reminded Damon of a smile that Julian would offer to Christian. It was welcoming and encouraging. Elgar shuffled, almost uncertainly at the generosity of spirit being shown to him. Elgar was honestly surprised that Christian, Iros's beloved, would take such an interest in him.
We've got to get Elgar on camera. I think our viewers would love it.
Julian grinned. Camera. Elgar frowned.
We have a website where we upload moving pictures. You've seen those.
Christian explained gently. Elgar brightened. Oh, yes. You are able to upload them for others to see? Like I see the other information?
Yes, and you could be on the net too.
Julian told him kindly. Elgar blinked. Oh, my. You don't want me on your show? Balthazar put a hand to his chest. I would bring in far more viewers.
It depends on the type of viewers.
Christian was very straight-faced. Balthazar muttered something about favorite fledgling, and then turned to his cat. And you, Mephi, my sweet, sweet, adorable boiler fluff, I bet you would love a palace. Yes, you would. And since you're the only one who is nice to me, you shall have the pick of the palace for your own room. Yes, you will. Oh, my love. Christian coughed into his hand as Balthazar devolved into baby talk with the kitten. Elgar looked on with lips parted at his master's affections for a dreaded cat. Julian snorted, and then rather suspiciously looked down at the ground as he turned it into a cough. Rajani merely looked on with mild interest, while Seer smiled benevolently. Fiona's eyebrows were raised.
I truly didn't know you were a cat person, Balthazar.
Let me guess. You're a dog person? Balthazar asked. She shrugged.
I really don't know. I've never allowed myself to.
She abruptly stopped.
I have no idea, not having had either one.
Guilt stabbed through Balthazar. Damon felt it clearly. Well, Balthazar said with a wave, you must spend some time with the kittens. You'll find out if you like one or the other, or both.
Perhaps I shall. I see that Mephi, though, is quite taken, so I won't have a chance to find out with him.
Fiona smiled. Balthazar petted the black kitten's head. Yes, Mephi is all mine.
And mine. And Elgar's.
Christian pointed out. I have never had a pet. Elgar stroked Iros's skull, which somehow belied that comment. Everyone was quiet. Rajani cleared her throat and said,
Yes, well, I am a cat person too. But nonetheless, this talk of destiny is important, because one of Callie's forms allegedly is hidden somewhere in the Everdark outside of destiny.
Damon's eyebrows rose even as Balthazar let out an explosive, What? How? The city's been locked since He gestured towards the skull in Elgar's loving embrace. Rajani patted the air as if to calm the emotions in the room with the motion.
Yes, that is true. But our listeners discovered that one of the Iros vampires left behind, well, is one of Callie's forms.
Damon's eyes narrowed. He took over the body of an Iros vampire? Rajani nodded, but then added,
And not just an Iros, but bodies from every one of the bloodlines.
There was a stunned silence. Then Balthazar let out a sharp laugh as he focused on Damon. Good thing you intend to rule us all, Damon, because it looks like we're going to have to go vampire hunting in every bloodline. Join us next time for episode 96, Listener to the Dead.
If you want to support this podcast and get the unedited episodes, we actually have something better than a Patreon. I have my own serial subscription website, wraithrain.com. It's an old-fashioned paywall site, just like Netflix or Crunchyroll. With a membership, you do get the uncut versions of Everdark with no intros, outros, or edited parts. Just the chapters as they were meant to be heard before we've had to make it all Disney safe. If this sounds interesting to you, try us out for a month. The link to sign up is in the notes. The most you'll pay is $9.95 a month, and you'll be directly supporting us, real people, not big corporations like Amazon or Netflix, not content created with AI. Wraith Rain is a small team of actual humans doing the best we can to transport you with romantic action and adventure stories. We really thank you for your support.
The Everdark Podcast by X Aratare is performed by Edward Fox, Adam Riley, Bruno Devant, Jay Thillis, Kelly Michaels, Vanessa Porter, and Hannah Hart, with Liz Gentle as Seer. Special guest performances by Jimmy McKinnon Jr. and Bobby Forrester. Edited by Matthew Prince. Continuity by Adriel Wiggins. Everdark is produced by Wraith Rain Publishing in association with Her Grace Reed Studios. Copyright 2022 by Wraith Rain Publishing.